On a sweltering summer afternoon at a dusty southern car auction, an old man in a faded military jacket quietly arrives, mocked by onlookers, ignored by staff. But when the bidding begins and a convoy of black vehicles rolls in, everything changes. Who is he? And why does his silence speak louder than any uniform? Stick around and don't forget to hit that subscribe button before we dive in. The summer sun beat down on the gravel lot with a fury only the deep south could conjure. The heat shimmered off hoods and windshields as if the vehicles themselves were sweating under the pressure of bidding wars to come. Dust clung to boots, to windshields, and to old men who walked like memories through time. Lucas Merritt, 67, stepped onto the lot in silence. His jacket, once olive green, had faded into something closer to gray. The fabric thinned at the elbows and the cuffs frayed with age. A patch on the left shoulder barely held on, its insignia worn down to threads. Some men wear their history on their sleeves. Lucas wore his on his back. "Hey, Grandpa, you lost or just hoping for a time machine?" The voice rang out with the casual cruelty of youth. A group of young men stood near a row of Mustangs, their laughter echoing between car doors. One of them, tall, tanned, and confident, held his phone up, filming. The others chuckled as Lucas walked past, his eyes scanning the rows for a very specific truck. Lucas said nothing. He didn't glare, didn't slow. He simply moved with quiet determination toward a dusty 2009 Dodge Ram parked near the back row. Its bed had scratches. The side mirror was cracked, but Lucas saw beyond all that. He saw wheels that could carry purpose. He opened a small notebook with yellowing pages, checked a handwritten list, then leaned down to inspect the undercarriage. His movements were deliberate, his eyes sharp. To him, this wasn't a used truck, it was the continuation of a promise. Behind him, the camera kept rolling. "Get this," the tall one said. "World War II's back from the dead and hunting for horsepower." Lucas placed a hand on the hood. It was warm, solid. He stood straight and walked slowly toward the registration booth, dust kicking at the heels of his cracked leather boots. The clerk behind the table, a man half Lucas's age and twice his skepticism, looked him up and down before asking, "You planning to bid today?" Sir Lucas nodded and reached into his jacket. From an inside pocket, he produced an old leather wallet, a folded-up bank statement, and a laminated ID. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but age and the sweat from the walk hadn't helped. The clerk took one look at the statement and raised an eyebrow. "Bidding starts at $6,000 for most vehicles. Just so you know." Lucas didn't flinch. "I know," he said, voice calm, quiet. "I've come prepared." Back in his jacket pocket, tucked safely behind the folds, was a photo he hadn't shown anyone here. A young woman in desert camo, smiling despite the sun glaring off sandbags behind her. Lieutenant Eva Merritt, his daughter, his light. She died 3 years earlier in a roadside bombing in Kandahar, delivering school supplies to local children. The truck wasn't for him. It was for the promise he made to her, and Lucas Merritt never broke promises. Lucas Merritt never broke promises. That's why he stood in line under the sweltering sky, his jacket heavy not with fabric but with meaning, his silence speaking louder than any defense. He had already shown the bank statement, handed over the ID, and registered his intention to bid. But not everyone believed in quiet honor. The auction manager, a balding man in his early 40s with aviator sunglasses and a sun-reddened nose, watched Lucas return to the waiting area with thinly veiled suspicion. He leaned over to his assistant, speaking in a voice that wasn't low enough to be private. "You really think he's going to win a bid? That jacket looks older than half these trucks." The assistant, a younger man still new to the job, shrugged. He paid the registration fee. Guess that counts for something. But it wasn't just the staff whispering now. The same group of boys who had mocked Lucas earlier hadn't moved on. They had only grown more confident. One of them, the one with the chain necklace and ripped designer jeans, chuckled while scrolling through his phone. "Bet you he thinks this is some kind of mission," he said, like he's here to save the world with an old Dodge. Another added, probably having a flashback. My uncle's the same. Starts talking to bushes and calling the cat captain. Laughter followed. Not cruel, but casual. The way people mock what they don't understand. Lucas heard every word. He didn't flinch, didn't correct them, didn't ask for understanding. Instead, he sat on a weathered bench under the one piece of shade he could find and opened his notebook again. The pages were stained at the corners, not from water, but from time. Each entry was written in his daughter's handwriting, Eva's handwriting. She had created the original delivery plan for what she called the outreach loop, a weekly route that brought fresh produce and canned essentials to low-income veterans and elderly residents in rural areas. Lucas had only stepped in when she no longer could. He reviewed the numbers again, 27 households. 4 delivery stops had become 7 in the past year. The gas mileage would strain his budget. The old van he once used with Eva was gone, its engine finally surrendering outside a hardware store 6 weeks ago. The Ram was not a dream, it was a necessity. And still, they laughed. 3 benches over. Someone else wasn't laughing. A tall, broad-shouldered man in pressed khakis and a navy polo shirt studied Lucas from behind dark glasses. His name was Alton Briggs, retired Army colonel. Now just a man looking for a used SUV for weekend camping trips with his grandkids. But something about Lucas had snagged in Alton's memory. It started with the jacket's standard issue. Yes, but bearing a nearly invisible triangle stitched above the heart. It was the emblem of Operation Iron Lantern, a classified mission from the early 2000s, rumored to have included deep-cover intelligence operatives embedded across 3 continents. Fewer than 40 men had ever worn that mark. Alton tilted his head. When Lucas shifted his seat, reaching down to tighten the cap on his thermos, a thin line of ink was exposed along his wrist. It wasn't a tattoo in the traditional sense. It was a grid coordinate, clean, surgical, latitude and longitude in military notation. Alton's heart skipped. He pulled out his phone not to film, not to gossip, but to call a number he hadn't used in a decade. When the voice on the other end answered, he spoke low, almost reverently. "This is Colonel Briggs, ID 9213, Delta. I think I found someone." The voice on the line hesitated. Confirmed subject, male, white, late 60s, wearing Iron Lantern insignia, grid mark on inner wrist, possible ID match with operative designation, Echo Merit. There was silence. "Then hold the location. Do not engage. We're activating protocol response." Alton ended the call and exhaled slowly. He looked back at Lucas. The old man hadn't moved. His hands were still on the notebook, thumb tracing a corner of the page where Eva had drawn a tiny sun with a smiling face. Back near the auction lanes, the boys had grown bolder. One had begun live streaming on social media, narrating in a dramatic voice. "Here we have Sergeant Grandpa, clearly here to infiltrate a suspicious group of used vehicles. Rumor has it he once rode dinosaurs to battle." Lucas stood, notebook in hand, and walked a few paces closer to the row of trucks. He ignored them, but not everyone did. A woman in her late 50s, wearing a blue blouse and aviator sunglasses of her own, stepped forward. She didn't say anything at first, just gave the boys a long, steady look. Eventually, she said, "You boys think that's funny." The laughter died. "My father wore a jacket just like that." She continued. "He was in Ann K in 68. He didn't talk much, either. Not after what he saw. The lead boy, Derek, shuffled. We were just kidding." "Sure you were." She turned to Lucas. "Sir, I hope you get exactly what you came for." Lucas tipped his head in gratitude but said nothing. Back on his bench, Alton opened an encrypted messaging app and typed a short sentence. "Echo Merit confirmed. Awaiting confirmation orders." A ping returned seconds later. "Secure and observe. Agent en route." Lucas, unaware of the web now forming around him, closed his notebook and placed it gently in his jacket. His fingers lingered on the outside pocket, where the photo of Eva rested, where the memory lived. He wasn't a ghost. He was a father, a farmer, a man fulfilling a daughter's dream. He wasn't here to be understood. He was here to work. And somewhere in the distance, a black SUV began its journey toward the county fairgrounds. The black SUV was still miles away, tires humming steadily across hot pavement, but its destination was already bracing for something extraordinary. Back at the auction grounds, Lucas Merritt sat on the same bench, notebook now tucked away in his jacket. He had reviewed every detail, rehearsed every number. There would be no second chance. The lot number was 58. The Dodge Ram, dusty and worn but intact, sat with its hood slightly open under the sun, as if waiting for him. Lucas glanced at the watch on his wrist. It had belonged to Eva. The battery was long dead, but he wore it like a compass, reminding him of where he needed to be and why. He stood slowly, joints stiff from age and stillness, and walked toward the auction block. Around him, the crowd thickened. The cars before his target were drawing bids quickly now. The auctioneer's voice bounced across the field like a mallet on a drum, rapid, rhythmic, practiced. Lot 56 sold for $6,900. Next up, Lot 57. One more before we reach the Dodge Ram. Lucas positioned himself near the edge of the crowd, gripping the small paddle with his number 73 printed in black ink. He'd rehearsed this too, when to raise it, how high he could go, when to stop. His budget was $7,800. Every cent mattered. It wasn't just about the truck. It was the last link to the network Eva had built, the promise he had made, and the people who waited each Sunday without fail. He breathed slowly, let the sweat bead and roll down his temples without wiping it away. The boys were still there, huddled together with their phones out, watching him. Derek, now emboldened by the audience they were building online, whispered just loud enough for Lucas to hear. "Get ready, boys." Grandpa's about to spend his war pension. Laughter flickered again. Not everyone joined in this time, but enough did. Lot 58 now coming up, the auctioneer called. A 2009 Dodge Ram, 112,000 miles. Clean title, cosmetic wear, but good bones. Starting bid $6,000. Do I hear six? Lucas raised his paddle without hesitation. 6,000 from bidder 73. The auctioneer barked. Do I hear 65, 6,500? Another bidder stepped in, man in a flannel shirt, chewing a toothpick. He raised his own paddle. 65. Do I hear 7? Lucas raised again. 7,000. The auctioneer's voice quickened. 7 from 73. Do I hear 75? Flannel shirt raised. 75. 8. Lucas's paddle went up again. 8,000. That was it. That was all he had left. He gripped the paddle tighter, feeling the weight of his entire purpose in his fingers. The auctioneer didn't hesitate. 8,000. Do I hear 85? Silence. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, flannel shirt raised again. 85. Lucas's hand stayed still. His paddle didn't rise. He stared straight ahead, lips tight, eyes unblinking. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked surprised, some disappointed. The boys, of course, reacted as expected. There it is, Derek whispered. Old man finally ran out of Monopoly money. He raised his phone again and zoomed in on Lucas's face, hoping to capture some trace of embarrassment, of defeat, but there was none. Lucas stood tall, lowering the paddle with dignity. He'd come with purpose. He'd done all he could, and now, like any soldier who understood limits, he knew when to stand down. The auctioneer shouted, going once, going twice, but the words never finished. A deep rumble emerged in the distance, low and steady, like a storm dragging its heels across dry ground. Heads turned, eyes squinted. From the far end of the lot, a dust cloud began to rise. Within seconds, the black SUV emerged, moving slowly but deliberately. It was flanked on either side by two Humvees desert tan, military marked, unmistakable. The auctioneer paused, microphone halfway to his lips. The bidding froze. The crowd went silent. Even Derek lowered his phone. The convoy rolled into the lot like a memory you couldn't forget. The SUV stopped directly in front of the auction block. The doors opened. Out stepped General Marie Hensley. Her uniform was crisp, adorned with 3 silver stars on each shoulder. Medals glinted across her chest like a language only some could read. Her posture radiated authority, not forced but lived a woman accustomed to command. She didn't look at the auctioneer, didn't glance at the vehicle. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Lucas. And then, without a word, she walked toward him. The crowd instinctively parted. Even those who didn't know who she was could feel the weight she carried. Lucas stood motionless as she approached. And then, slowly, he straightened his spine and met her gaze. "Commander Merritt," she said, stopping directly in front of him. "May I approach?" Lucas blinked. For the first time that day, his composure cracked just for a second. Recognition shimmered in his expression, like the hint of a long-forgotten melody. "Marie," he said softly, "you're taller than I remember." She smiled. "That's just the stars." He nodded. Permission granted. And then she saluted. A perfect, formal salute. The kind you didn't offer just any man. Only to one who had earned it. Silently, deeply, permanently. Lucas returned the gesture, slow and sure. Around them, the silence thickened into reverence. The auctioneer finally spoke, voice subdued. "Should we continue?" General Hensley turned to him. "That won't be necessary." She gestured to an aide who stepped forward, holding a leather case. Inside were papers, neatly signed and sealed. "This vehicle," she said calmly, "has been acquired through the Veterans Legacy Fund in honor of Lieutenant Eva Merritt. It now belongs to her father, Commander Lucas Merritt." The auctioneer took the papers, eyes wide, mouth opening without sound. He flipped through the forms, nodded once, and stepped back. The crowd erupted not in noise but in realization. Derek lowered his phone, finally seeing not an old man in a dusty jacket but something else entirely. Someone. Lucas accepted the keys without a word. And then, for the first time in hours, he looked down at the paddle in his hand. Number 73. The number didn't win the bid, but Lucas Merritt hadn't come to win. He'd come to finish something, and that had only just begun. Lucas hadn't come to win. And yet, as the keys to the Dodge Ram were placed in his weathered hands, every person present understood that something greater had just occurred, something no dollar amount could define. The crowd, once indifferent, now stood in collective silence, watching the quiet man in the dusty jacket transform before their eyes. General Hensley turned toward the auctioneer, who was still frozen in place with the microphone loosely gripped in one hand. "This man is not a civilian bidder," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the lot. "He is Commander Lucas Merritt, former lead officer of Operation Iron Lantern, recipient of 3 Defense Distinguished Service Medals, and one of the most effective covert humanitarian tacticians of his time." The words struck the air like thunder. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some in awe, others in disbelief. Derek and his friends had lowered their phones now, no longer filming. The lenses were useless when you were no longer looking down on a man, but up. General Hensley stepped aside as another uniformed officer approached a young Army captain, carrying a mahogany box with a velvet-lined interior. He stood before Lucas, snapped to attention, and announced in ceremonial cadence, "On behalf of the Secretary of the Army and the Office of Veteran Affairs, we present the Freedom Star to Lieutenant Eva Merritt, posthumously awarded for her extraordinary service and sacrifice in the protection of civilian lives during conflict operations in Kandahar province." Lucas reached forward with both hands, trembling not with fear, but with reverence. As the box was opened, a golden medal shimmered in the light. The ribbon was crimson and ivory, the emblem shaped like a rising sun behind a shield, bore Ava's name etched in deliberate, solemn script. "She never told me," Lucas said softly, voice breaking for the first time. "She never said what she did over there. It was classified until last month." Hensley replied gently. "Your daughter saved 31 civilians, including 12 children, by redirecting a fuel truck that had been rigged with explosives. She stayed behind to steer it clear of the village. The explosion was visible from 5 miles away." Lucas nodded once, pressing his lips together, then closed the box with quiet finality. Another officer stepped forward with a decal in hand, white vinyl letters on a soft blue background. "Eva's route, nourish with honor." "We've applied for permanent nonprofit designation," Hensley said. "The Veterans Legacy Fund will cover vehicle maintenance, gas, and logistics. Your mission is now officially recognized. What your daughter began will not end in silence." From the edge of the crowd, a woman stepped forward. She was in her 60s, with silver streaks in her tightly pulled hair and deep lines around her eyes that hinted at grief once endured. She clutched a cloth bag in one hand and pressed it against her chest as she approached. "Mr. Merritt," she said, voice shaking. "You don't know me. My name's Nora Wexley. My father Emmett, he's in that outreach loop. He never knew who delivered the vegetables every Sunday, but he told me once, 'There's this young woman who smiles when she hands me tomatoes, and for a minute, it feels like the war never happened.'" Lucas looked at her, eyes softening. He was in Korea. She nodded, combat engineer, lost most of his hearing in '53. Ava's visits gave him something to look forward to. He lived 2 years longer than the doctors predicted. He always said it was the fresh food and the kindness. Others stepped forward. A middle-aged man wearing a veteran's cap murmured, "My uncle was on that route. He passed last winter, but he asked us to keep donating to the girls' project. We never knew her name. Until now." Then a teenager, barely 16, walked up awkwardly, shifting his weight. "She came to my grandfather's house too. She'd stay and fix the porch light, or help clean his windows. She didn't just drop off food, she saw people." Lucas could barely respond. His mouth moved once, twice. Then he simply placed a hand over the metal case, nodding slowly. Derek, who had been standing near the rear of the crowd, turned away and wiped his eyes quickly. No one mocked now. No one filmed. Even the auctioneer had stepped down from the platform, leaving the microphone dangling beside his hip. One by one, they came forward, people who had received Eva's quiet service, or knew someone who had. Names were shared, stories whispered. The truck, once just a utility vehicle, became something else entirely. A symbol, a vessel of memory. General Hensley waited until the hush returned. Then stepping up onto the edge of the auction platform, she addressed the crowd. "What you witnessed today wasn't just a military reunion. It was the unveiling of what real service looks like. It doesn't wear medals. It doesn't ask for attention. It shows up, quietly, week after week. It serves with humility, and it leaves behind legacy, not noise." She looked down at Lucas. Commander Merritt served with valor overseas, but his greatest contribution, perhaps, began after he came home. Lucas looked at her, shook his head lightly, and replied, "I just packed carrots and drove a truck." The crowd chuckled softly, but many were crying. A few minutes later, volunteers from the Veterans Outreach Program arrived to help apply the decal to the truck. One of them, a retired corporal missing his right hand, saluted Lucas with his left and said, "That truck will go farther than any tank I ever rode in." Lucas finally managed to smile, tired, but true. Back near the benches, Alton Briggs stood with his arms crossed, nodding in silent approval. He'd known Lucas had disappeared from records. Most had assumed he was dead or hidden for good. But now, the world knew the truth. And it had come not with explosions or headlines, but with cucumbers, kindness, and a father's quiet devotion. A reporter from the local paper approached. pen poised, asking for a quote. Lucas paused, looked at the man, then gently refused. "This isn't about me," he said. It never was. Instead, he turned to the truck, ran his hand down the side. The old metal was warm from the sun, but it felt new now, renewed, like memory given motion. In that moment, Lucas Merritt wasn't just a former commander. He was Eva's father, and the route would continue. The route would continue. Lucas Merritt had no desire for applause, no interest in headlines, but by the end of that day, his quiet service had already begun to echo in the hearts of those who had once misunderstood him. The crowd at the auction had mostly dispersed, the sun finally softening into a golden haze across the fairgrounds. Volunteers were helping load crates into the back of the newly donated truck, while Lucas stood beside it, hands resting gently on the tailgate. He was watching, listening not to the noise, but to the silence that had replaced the mockery. Derek hovered on the edge of that silence. He hadn't said a word since the general left. He hadn't posted a video, hadn't laughed, hadn't met anyone's eyes. He stood with his phone still in his hand, but it now pointed toward the ground. Lucas noticed him, but said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence often speaks loudest. Finally, Derek took a deep breath and approached. His feet dragged slightly, as if the gravel resisted his every step. His voice was hesitant, but honest. "Sir, I wanted to say I'm sorry." Lucas turned to face him, his eyes weathered and steady, met the boys with a softness that disarmed the rest of Derek's rehearsed apology. "I was out of line," Derek continued. "I didn't know. I thought you were just some old guy. You know, I didn't see anything past the jacket." Lucas nodded once, neither dismissive nor smug. "Most judgment," he said quietly, "comes from what we choose not to see." Derek swallowed hard. "You didn't deserve that." "None of it." Lucas gave a small shrug. "Deserve has very little to do with how people act, but what you do after matters more." The words settled between them like truth made visible. Then Derek said something he hadn't planned to say at all. "Can I help, with the deliveries? My granddad used to be part of the VFW, but I never really paid attention to that stuff until today." Lucas tilted his head slightly. "You want to ride along, I want to show up. Like she did. Like you did." Lucas looked at the truck, then back at the boy. "Sunday. 6, sharp. I'll be there." The handshake they shared was brief, but not casual. It carried weight of recognition, of growth, of beginnings. As Derek stepped back, his friends, who had been watching from a distance, exchanged glances. One of them muttered, "You're really going to get up at 6? I think I should have been getting up a long time ago," Derek said. The others didn't argue. Instead, they walked over too slowly, awkwardly. They didn't offer apologies with the same conviction Derek had, but they asked the right question. "Is there anything we can do?" Lucas gave them the same answer. Sunday, 6. Word spread fast. By that evening, the small rural town was already buzzing with retellings of the day. But what people repeated the most wasn't the medals or the general or even the story about Eva's sacrifice. What they talked about was the way the crowd had changed the shift from laughter to respect, from judgment to reverence. The next day, the auction house printed and framed a photo taken by a local reporter. It showed Lucas, hands outstretched, receiving the keys to the truck while 4 uniformed soldiers stood behind him. Above the photo, engraved in brass, was a single sentence: "Kindness never seeks applause, but it earns respect in silence." It hung on the main office wall, right above the registration counter. The photo quickly became something more than decoration. Veterans nodded at it when they passed through. Teenagers pointed it out to friends. Parents paused and explained it to their children. On Sunday, before dawn, Lucas drove the Dodge to the edge of town. The bed was already packed with crates of fresh vegetables, cartons of eggs, and a few bundles of flowers Eva used to call hope in petals. He expected maybe Derek would show. 5 volunteers were waiting. By the second stop, two more had joined in, arriving by bike. By the end of the month, the route had expanded from 27 households to 41. Lucas remained at the center of it all, never commanding, only guiding. He still spoke little, but what he said stayed with people. Derek became the most dedicated of the new volunteers. He asked questions, listened closely, and began tracking the routes on a map. He started calling recipients by name. When an older man in a wheelchair joked that Derek was better than the mail, the boy just grinned and said, "We deliver more than bills." One evening, after a long day of deliveries, Derek helped Lucas unpack the final empty crates back at the farm. "I used to think strength was being the loudest voice in the room," Derek said, brushing dust off his jeans. Lucas handed him a towel. "It's usually the one who doesn't speak unless it's needed." Derek looked around at the quiet fields, the sun dipping behind the barn. "This place, it feels like it knows things." Lucas smiled. "It does, and it remembers." As autumn approached, more young people joined, some from nearby towns, a few who had seen the photo online. What had begun as correction became commitment. What had started with shame became service, and Lucas Merritt, the man once mocked for his silence, became a quiet center of gravity for an entire generation, seeking something real to follow. Not a sermon, not a slogan, just a dusty jacket, a truck with a name, and a promise kept. The dusty jacket, the worn truck. The early mornings, these became more than symbols. They became the heartbeat of a quiet revolution. What began as a boy's redemption and a father's promise had bloomed into something far larger. Eva's route was no longer just a Sunday delivery. It was a movement rooted in dignity, grown from grief, and watered by the hands of strangers who now felt like family. 1 year later, the Grayson County Veterans Affairs Office issued a press release. Eva's route, now officially recognized as a nonprofit partner of the Department of Veterans Affairs, would begin piloting its services in 3 additional counties. The announcement brought few headlines, but for Lucas Merritt, that was perfect. He didn't need applause. He had vegetables to pack. The farmhouse hadn't changed much, is still humble, still creaking in the wind, but there were more footprints in the dirt now, more hands in the soil. The old barn had been retrofitted into a sorting station, with coolers donated by a grocery chain and shelving built by volunteers. The chalkboard on the inside wall listed every recipient on the weekly route, 48 names now, with new ones added each month. Lucas sat at the kitchen table most mornings before dawn, thermos in one hand. Photo of Eva nearby, her medal, still in its velvet box, rested on the mantel above the fireplace next to a faded drawing she'd made at age 10 of a food truck that saves the world. He never spoke about the medal, never bragged about her mission, but every Saturday night, he'd polish the truck decal by hand, wiping away the dust from the words Eva's route, nourished with honor. When the VA offered to host a formal dedication in Washington, D.C., Lucas politely declined. Again, "I've got beans to sort," he said with a smile, but not everyone took no for an answer. Derek, now a college freshman studying sustainable agriculture at the State University, sent him an email with the subject line, "Just once," in the body. A single line, "It's not for you. It's for the people who need to hear you." Lucas didn't respond right away. But a few weeks later, when General Marie Hensley visited the farm in person wearing jeans and a windbreaker instead of stars and ribbons, he finally gave her a nod. "You get one speech," he said, "and I'm not wearing a tie." The invitation came from the White House, a national ceremony honoring civilian service initiatives supporting veterans. Lucas arrived in clean overalls and a buttoned shirt, a small embroidered patch on his chest, Eva's route. He stood out among the suits, not in defiance, but in quiet proof that work clothes can carry legacy just as well as uniforms. When it was his turn to speak, Lucas stepped up to the podium slowly, unhurried. He took a moment before saying a word, eyes scanning the crowd not for recognition, but for anyone who needed to feel seen. "I don't know much about speeches," he began. "I know about soil, I know about early mornings and heavy boxes and front porches with broken railings. There was a quiet chuckle from the crowd. I also know what loneliness looks like, he continued. I've seen it through storm windows and rusted screen doors. That's what my daughter saw too. And instead of writing papers about it, she packed bags of tomatoes and went knocking. His hands stayed at his sides, steady as stone. She taught me that sometimes. The delivery isn't the real reason we show up. It's the visit. It's the dignity. It's saying, "You still matter," without needing to say anything at all. He paused. The silence felt full, not empty. I wasn't a hero, Lucas said. My daughter was. But not because she got a medal, because she cared, and she acted. Then, with the same simplicity he lived by. He finished, not every hero wears medals. Some just quietly carry groceries to someone's door. The applause rose not thunderous, but honest. Later, a journalist asked if Lucas would agree to be profiled in a major magazine. He declined again. This story doesn't belong to me, he said. It belongs to everyone who's ever knocked on a door because they didn't want someone to feel forgotten. Back at the farm, the volunteers had grown in number and diversity. Retired mechanics taught teenagers how to fix the delivery vans. High schoolers learned about composting from former combat medics. A widowed librarian baked bread every Friday night to send with the crates. A former sergeant with PTSD found peace among the tomato rows, humming Eva's favorite hymn as he worked. Derek, now in his second semester, chose Eva's route as the subject of his senior thesis, The Quiet Engine. How small acts of service power community resilience? He visited the farm weekly, helping design a more efficient greenhouse system and tracking soil improvement. In his conclusion, he wrote, Mr. Merritt changed my life not with a lecture, but with a nod. He taught me that real strength doesn't command attention. It plants something, waits, and shows up again the next day. In the spring, Lucas received another envelope, this one with a presidential seal. It contained a personal letter and a commemorative pin, recognizing his and Eva's service to the nation. A handwritten postscript read, "The soil may not remember names, but the people do." Lucas placed the letter in a drawer and the pin beside Eva's medal. Then he went outside and checked the irrigation lines. The morning deliveries never stopped, even as more counties joined, and even as his knees stiffened more each season. Lucas kept showing up, not because he wanted recognition, but because he still remembered the faces at the other end of each porch. One afternoon, after a long route, Lucas sat beneath the shade of the old pecan tree behind the house. The truck rested nearby, its wheels muddy but proud. The voices of volunteers echoed from the barn, laughter mixed with purpose. A little girl, the granddaughter of one of the new volunteers, walked up and handed him a daisy. "For Ava," she said. Lucas accepted it, eyes misting. He placed the flower gently in his shirt pocket, over his heart. The legacy hadn't just grown from soil. It had taken root.